In this demonstration, I will demonstrate how to deploy an Active Directory Domain Services instance from the Azure portal. I start by selecting Create a Resource. In the text box, I type domain, and that gives me the option of selecting AD Domain Services. I select that option. From the AD Domain Services page, I select Create. This brings up the Create Azure AD Domain Services page. The first thing I do is I select a resource group to store all of the information related to Azure AD Domain Services. I select Tailwind RG. As I have associated the domain name tailwindtraders.net with this particular Azure subscription, that is a suggested domain name for the Active Directory Domain Services domain, so I will keep that. The region will be East US. Here I will set the SKU to standard rather than the default of enterprise. The forest type is set to user rather than as a resource forest. I then select Next. The next step is on the networking page, and this allows me to configure a virtual network. Any virtual machines that I want to add to this domain need to be placed on this particular virtual network. It's allowing me to create a new virtual network called AADDS-VNet. It also gives me the option of a subnet, AADDS subnet. I select Next. Here it is telling me who will receive notifications when an alert or critical warning occurs. By default, it will select all global administrators of the Azure Active Directory directory and members of the Azure Active Directory DC Administrators group. I can also add additional recipients. I select Next. On the synchronization page, I take the default of syncing all of Azure Active Directory to the managed domain. I can choose to only synchronize part of Azure Active Directory to the Azure Active Directory Domain Services instance. I select Next. On the Review and Create page, I review my selections and then I select Create. I'm prompted to select OK. I select OK and it initializes the deployment. Now, the deployment of Azure Active Directory Domain Services can take between half an hour to 1.5 hours, depending on the region you're in and the way that the deployment occurs. So the demonstration video here has been edited to reduce this amount of time. We see that the deployment is complete, and then I can select Azure Active Directory, or I can go into All Resources, and I can select from my All Resources node the tailwindtraders.net Azure AD Domain Services instance. When I select that, I'm still told that the managed domain is being provisioned and that this will take a while. I come back about 45 minutes later and I see that tailwindtraders.net is in a state of running. Now that Azure Active Directory Domain Services is in a state of running, I need to configure several things. The first is to configure the virtual network DNS servers. So on this page, I am shown that the IP addresses of the DNS servers need to be updated to 10.0.0.4 and 10.0.0.5. I can do this by selecting the Configure option. I select Configure. It will then go and update that virtual network automatically. Once that virtual network is updated, the next thing that I need to do is I need to configure individual users so that they can actually log in to virtual machines using Active Directory Domain Services. And the trick to doing that is to force a password reset. And when you do that, it will update the way that the password is stored so that it can actually be used by Azure AD Domain Services. So we have instructions for cloud-only user accounts and instructions for synchronized user accounts. So to do that for a cloud account, what I'm doing now is I'm going to go to my Active Directory instance. So I select Azure Active Directory. And the way that I do that is I select the user that I wish to update. In this case, I'm going to select a user named Gamma User, and I reset that user's password. When I reset the password, the user, next time they sign in to Azure Active Directory, will be forced to change their password. So I select Reset Password, and I'm assigned a temporary password, which I would need to communicate to that particular user. Then what I do is I switch to a separate browser, and I'll pretend that I'm actually that user. I sign in as that user to the Azure portal, gammauser@tailwindtraders.net. I select Next. I enter that temporary password. I select Sign In, and then I need to assign the new password. And when I will do that, that user is now fully enabled for Azure AD Domain Services and can sign in using that to any virtual machine that is present on that virtual network that is domain joined.